we're going to get started a little early. If there's anyone that filters in, they can. Welcome and thank you for attending our panel, which is titled, You Had to Be There, Tales and Tips from Shoeleather Reporting in Local Communities. As Harry Smith talked about yesterday, reporting in person is a unique and rewarding part of being a journalist, whether that's going to war zones or dressing up like a groundhog. I'm Gabrielle Bowman, a Murrow College student and part of the Expedition Journalism course. We are all here that organized this panel with 3 professional journalists. I'm going to briefly introduce them and then hand things over to another member of our class, Kedzie Moe, who will moderate the panel. We'll have time for audience questions at the very end for anyone. All 3 of our panelists are journalists working in local news here in Washington, and we're grateful that they could make the time in their busy schedules to talk with us today. Rachel's son is a multimedia journalist working in local news here in Washington. They work for Northwest Public Broadcasting, the Lewiston Tribune, and the Moscow Pullman Daily News in a collaborative reporting position. Rachel is a Murrow College alum as well. Mallory Crummell is a Murrow News Fellow covering Port Townsend and Jefferson County for the Port Townsend Leader. She's a graduate from Western Washington University. And Eric Bengal is a Murrow News Fellow covering rural communities for the Walla Walla Union Bulletin. He is from Oregon, where he was previously a reporter and editor and is a graduate from Columbia Journalism School. Hand it off to you, Kedzie.
Yeah, so thank you once again for coming, and thank you to our panelists for making time to be here. Like Gabby said, my name is Kedzie. I am a senior here at the Murrow College, and during my time as a member of the Murrow College, I've participated in a handful of the experiential learning activities, such as going down to Arizona for MLB spring training. I've gone to Greece, and then I've also participated in the Rural Reporting Plunge, which, for those of you who don't know, is a really phenomenal opportunity for students to get out in the local community and make connections and find stories in small local towns. So I've been to a few very tiny towns in Idaho, and honestly, that's been one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had. Gabby and I also both work for the Daily Evergreen, so we both have experience kind of engaging with members of small town communities, and yeah, once again, that has been one of the most rewarding experiences I think I've had the pleasure of participating in here at Murrow. So we'll start with a few questions for all the panelists about your experiences as local journalists. So first of all, if you could tell us about a time when you were reporting in person and the experience was surprising or maybe not what you expected. So I'll let either one of you kick that off.
Yeah, I guess I can start. Going into any story that I do my best to not come in with expectations, because I think, everyone's an individual and there's so many unknowns as much as you try to prepare. But I think the most recent example that I can think of is in the past week, actually, I was interviewing an OB-GYN who's in the Lewiston-Clarkston Valley. He's the only one in serving those 2 cities providing that type of care. And so I was talking to him about, providing care for pregnant women and what that's like, and I was curious if some of the state laws in Idaho, which is the state he practices, had affected his work at all, if it made it harder to recruit doctors. And what he said actually surprised me based on what I'd heard from other doctors in the state, which is that he didn't feel like it directly affected the care that he did, which, other doctors in Idaho have said different things. But it was a reminder that even among professionals, even, within very specific communities, there's going to be a lot of different perspectives and opinions that you hear. So I think that was just a reminder for me that you're always going to need to seek out multiple sources, and if you've heard from one doctor or one expert source, you've heard from one expert source. That's not going to be reflective of the whole community, because it never can be.
Ooh, let's see. So I mostly cover city government in Port Townsend, but we're a super small newsroom, so we kind of get pulled in whatever direction we need to get pulled in to fill the paper. And we got a call one day from someone who calls himself a shepherd I told the fellows about this yesterday, but turns out he works with the public utility district out there to mitigate fire risk and deal with vegetation management out in their utility corridor. And so I got assigned the story, and I was expecting to just like show up at the PUD, and there'd be like goats in a little like fenced-in area, and I just take some photos and like talk to this guy. So I show up, and he shows up in this Penske moving truck, like one of those big yellow moving trucks. And he's like, "Oh, just hop in, like we'll just go drive out there." So I hop in because I have to write the story. And it like doesn't have seat belts. The radio's been taken out, like just a sketchy truck. Clearly he's transporting these goats in this truck. There's hay everywhere. It was a whole deal. And so we start driving on like the paved road, and he turns off into the service road. He has to like hop out and open the gate. We're driving on the service road for 30 minutes. Like, I don't know this man. 30 minutes just in a car talking with him. But we had a really great conversation, and I was able to, learn more about him and his background and like this project in itself. Instead of just like standing there asking him questions for 30 minutes, it was more conversational, which was really nice. And so we got out there, and he has 100 goats just like roaming around. And so I got to take photos. I got to feed the goats. And in our conversation, he told me that he's pursuing a contract with the PUD to continue the work, and that he wanted to increase his herd by 9 times. So that's close to 1,000 goats, which I wouldn't have known that if we hadn't, just been like having a conversation. So I will say I should have, looking back, I should have brought some like, mace with me just in case, or like, we didn't have service out there, so who knows what could have happened. But I think following your judgment is super important, especially in those situations. Even if your editor is like, you need to get this story, if you feel uncomfortable in any way, voice those things, because your safety is really important. I felt safe, so I went ahead with it, but that's what I will say.
At one point I wrote a story about a private plane that had crashed in the Columbia River, and about a week later I was out with the Sheriff's Office Marine Patrol. We were out on the river, and they had already recovered the bodies, but this was the day they were going to haul the wreck out of the water. And for about the first hour, it felt like just a regular ride-along. So the conversation was very process-oriented, very mission-oriented, and I was just getting the basics of what I needed to write the story. But I just kept making conversation with the sergeant who was kind of overseeing the operation. And it evolved into a conversation about just the kind of human toll that events like that have on someone in his position. So we talked about just the significance of recovering the belongings and returning them to the bereaved, and what it's like to be there when bodies, are brought to the surface. And it became clear that he wasn't fully compartmentalizing experiences like that. And so it was an interesting development, because I was expecting just pure, aren't we badasses doing badass work? But it was actually a very human, poignant conversation, and some of it was off the record. And then later, a long time later, I called him for a story, and I wondered if he remembered me, and he said, "Oh yeah, Eric Bengal, we went boating."
So we've had a few students raise the point that as a small town journalist, you're maybe a little bit more recognizable than you would be if you were, say, in a big city and you could just sort of maybe slip into the crowd a little bit easier. So has that raised any uncomfortable situations you've had related to your reporting? And if so, how did you handle that?
I think working in a small town, there's always going to be a lot of people that you know to some degree. I think what comes up for me the most is having to tell people, well, actually, like, we hang out, I can't use you as a source. I've had uncomfortable situations over the past close to 9 years of reporting. At one point when I was reporting in Sandpoint, I don't know if any of you know who Heather Scott is. She was holding a town hall, and she said something along the lines of, "and the line media," and made eye contact with me and kind of stopped. So that wasn't so much specifically related to being in a small town, but it's an uncomfortable situation that happened. And You just kind of gotta know that you're doing things right and be okay with, some people will have a problem with you. Yeah, when it comes to small towns specifically, I think it mainly was just knowing where to draw the line of like, okay, if we have a personal relationship, I'm not going to use you as a source. Other than that, I haven't had a whole lot of problems. People will sometimes want to come and talk to you, pitch you stories. That's never been a problem for me. No one's ever been disrespectful or, tried to push something more than they should, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, I haven't had any particularly nasty interactions. It is very obvious when I am at city council meetings because I'm the youngest one there by 30 years, and I have my little laptop and my little phone recording. But I think being recognizable in a small town has its pros and cons. I mean, people will call you out on social media if they aren't happy with what you've published, but they also will come up to you because they know your face and they will share stories with you. So yeah, I think there's definitely pros and cons, but I love being in a small newsroom. It's a lot of work, but you feel like you're doing really important work because if you weren't there, those stories wouldn't be told.
Yeah, I mean, I've also been called out at public meetings, either because of something I wrote or something I didn't write, or because my newspaper did something that they're angry about and I'm being blamed for it. And if it's in the middle of a public meeting, I mean, if you have to say something, just say, I'm here as an observer, not a participant, but we can talk after the meeting. If you feel that they're operating in good faith, then just ask specifically what they have a problem with. And make sure you understand those concerns. You can even point to the stories and say, where in the story do you find a problem here? And if something needs to be corrected, correct it. Otherwise, just integrate the information and consider it moving forward. If they're operating in bad faith, if they're trying to just get under your skin and bludgeon you with criticism, you just have them send you an email. You're not going to feel good about what you do all the time. You're going to be on the receiving end of verbal abuse, but after a while you learn to sift what is valuable from what isn't valuable.
And we're going to ask you guys to speak up too, just so people in the back can hear.
Okay.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to add to what Mallory said, I think that in a lot of ways there are so many benefits to reporting in a small town. You are able to actually get to know people and they can get to know you and build trust and build a rapport in a way that is a lot more difficult if you're in a bigger market. It's not impossible by any means, but you often end up having trust and getting access to things that other reporters wouldn't, because people know who you are and they get to see your work every day. So yeah, there's challenges to reporting in small towns, in rural communities, but there's so much opportunity as well, and I think that that's important to highlight.
I think one common question that I've noticed being raised throughout Symposium is kind of the notion of anxiety or imposter syndrome. So I'd like to ask you guys what advice you have for student journalists who feel nervous about talking to strangers and getting out into the community and making those connections.
Go for it.
I would say first, do it scared, do it nervous. You don't always have to be super comfortable. I'm nervous right now. I'm not used to talking in front of a big room. And most of my student journalism career, and sometimes still, depending on the situation, I get nervous for interviews. That's a normal thing. And if you're really freaking out, if you're having a panic attack, maybe that's something that needs additional work with a therapist or someone who can help you professionally with that. But it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to be scared. Keep doing it anyway. You will grow those skills and you'll be a better reporter for it, for putting yourself out there. And then the other thing is, know what you need, know what calms your nervous system down. For me, sometimes I like to scream, sing Paramore in my car. Sometimes I like to exercise. Sometimes I like to journal. All of those things are helpful for me to bring me down. So know what things you need and practice doing those, and then just no, it's okay to feel scared. Professional journalists still get nervous all the time. That's okay.
Yeah, I think being nervous is a good sign, honestly, especially when you're a young reporter. I think if you have a huge ego and you're totally comfortable in every situation, that's not a great sign, at least to me. I think we all understand that what we do is really important and we want to tell the story right, and that comes with anxiety, rightfully so. So I think even leaning into it, like just questioning why you have those anxieties and trying to address them, is really important. But I will say, yes, I am still super nervous. I remember when I was first, like right out of college, I would write out every single question I had for these interviews and like check them after every single time that they answered a question. And you can slowly move away from that. But yeah, I still am very nervous in a lot of situations, especially with covering really important things. It comes with a lot of responsibility. So I think it's good to be nervous sometimes.
100% what they said. I mean, you just have to give yourself permission to feel awkward, to feel uncomfortable, to understand that you don't have to be great at that part of the job in order to get the story. You just have to be adequate, and it does get easier. And eventually the fear of not being able to do the job or not having a job, that will overwhelm your fear of talking to strangers.
I'll ask one more before I open it up to any audience questions. So with varying backgrounds, because all of you come from very different either schools or previous reporting experiences, what drew you to and what do you find most rewarding about this specific kind of work?
I can start. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I got to college. No idea. I kind of thought of being a teacher, just because I love teaching, and just the act of like, maybe I know something you don't and I can help you understand that topic has always been something I've enjoyed. And I'm losing my train of thought, but I took a lot of GURs, again, really didn't know what I was doing. And then I took a news writing class just because it was like, it somehow fit in my schedule. And just the act of like, of not dumbing down a situation, but like becoming an expert on a situation and then explaining it to other people kind of scratch that itch of teaching. But I also get to learn new things every day, which is probably why I went into this field.
I just really love the craft. I just love sitting down and writing. I love expressing a thought the best way that I can. I love growing with every story. And yeah, I knew I wanted to read and write for a living, and I didn't know how any of that would be channeled. But, you know, sometimes journalists say that, well, you have to be curious in order to be a journalist. And I find that just being forced to write will itself propel you into a mind space of curiosity. And so just being in that state every day, that's what I love about it.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think there's a lot of reasons. I think one of the biggest ones was I wanted to do something that helped other people in some way. And, you know, I mean, it's not like every story I do is life-changing for most people, but it's an important public service. And on top of that, yeah, I love the process of writing and learning new things and getting to tell other people about that. I love explaining new stuff that I learned to people. There's so many things. I think journalism is a really challenging field. It's challenged me like interpersonally and to be a better thinker and writer and in so many different ways, and I like that. I think it makes me a better person. And it's so cool that I get to also do a public service and work for my community, and you know that, yeah, it's just such a cool job. So many reasons, all of the above that were listed and more.
Yeah, so now, are there any questions out here, and if not, I have a few more that I can ask, but I figured I'd just open it up. Yeah, Lauren?
What tools or aspects that you've learned in local journalism will you take with you when maybe you're not in local journalism anymore? Like 30 years down the road, you'll remember something that you did today or yesterday, and you're like, oh my god, like I wouldn't have done this if I hadn't have done this.
It's a really good question. I was just gonna say, like, be open to opportunities as they are presented to you. It's really easy to say no and be a little bit frightened about some stories that you could be assigned, but just gaining experience and letting yourself be in that uncomfortable situation and learning from that, I think, is really important and something that I've been trying to do more so recently. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. I think that a lot of the skills that you pick up in local journalism it's all the same skills that you need to do good journalism anywhere. You know, curiosity and being diligent, following up, taking time when you need to, just good interviewing skills. And even if you're not in journalism, like so many of the things that I've learned in journalism in these smaller markets, just like I said before, make me a more well-rounded person and make me more equipped to handle so many different situations. I think that sometimes there's also this idea of, you know, small town journalism being a stepping stone for people, and that's not always the case. And I'm not saying that, you know, that's what you were saying either, but like some people spend their whole lives working in local journalism, and that's really fulfilling and that's really important work. And you know, people in small towns, people in rural communities deserve just as much to have their story told, and often don't have the same opportunity to share their stories that people in other places do. So, you know, everything that it takes to be a good small town journalist is also important for larger markets, and I think for life as a whole.
Yeah, I think that when you're starting out, you're probably going to be pressed into service in any number of different directions, and you'll often be a general assignment reporter where you have to write obituaries and cover city council and write profiles and obits and breaking news, and you might write sprawling long-form features, and just knowing that you can deploy your voice in various directions, that will give you a lot of confidence as you kind of rise through the ranks of the profession.
I will also say that I think I've learned how to really build trust with my sources. And I think that's important in any profession. Especially, I mean, there are some city council members that just don't trust us at all, and that will happen. But some of them will appreciate what you're doing. I have a council member that will, if I can't stay for the entire 5-hour city council meeting and I miss something, he'll text me or he'll email me like, hey, they just voted on a new parking plan or something like that. But yeah, building trust is definitely something I'll take with me from a local newsroom into whatever comes next.
Also knowing that you can do awkward conversations and survive it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, one after another,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it does get easier.
I also think just defending yourself is something that you're gonna really learn really quickly. Defending your choices and just defending yourself. Yeah.
I'd kind of like to follow up that question with another one, which is the process of finding stories in these communities. In a smaller market, how do you keep things interesting for both yourself as the reporter doing this work, but also your audience, who are the people consuming what you put out?
I can
Go for it.
I think following, first of all, what you're interested in. If there's something that you think is really exciting, there's probably going to be other people who think so too. I think engaging with your community outside of your work and knowing what's going on is important. not siloing yourself off in your office and then, going straight back to your apartment and back and forth all day. And, sometimes that happens if you're having a rough week. But just paying attention to what's happening and what your friends are talking about and what your neighbors are talking about is a really big thing. Paying attention to social media pages, not everyone loves Facebook. I don't love Facebook, but sometimes those community forums are the first place that reporters find a breaking story of some kind within their community, because people are like, what the heck's going on F Street, So just engage in your community and follow what you think is interesting.
Yeah, I think meeting your community where they're at is really important. And again, not siloing yourself. Like Fort Townsend, their median population is, or what was I gonna say? Their average age is 60 plus, and they love Facebook. Oh boy, they love it. So I think yes, meeting them where they're at is, you'll find stories. You just will. They're gonna complain about things. Some of them are valid, some of them are just NIMBY stuff where it's get off Facebook. But there are good things there. And I think just showing up at, I show up at a lot of meetings. I mean, that's my beat, is to go to city council meetings. But even just having conversations with the people around you at those meetings is really important. Why did you show up today? What are you interested in? Things like that. But yes, also just being out in your community. A couple weeks ago, I was just parked in at one of the beaches in Port Townsend, reading a book, so it was too cold for me to walk on the beach. And someone walked past me and was talking about they had found a mastodon tusk out on the beach, and no one knew about this. And the only reason I knew and could write the story that was published yesterday is because I was sitting in that spot. So if I was in my little apartment, we would not have ever known. So I think, again, it's really important to get out in your community and just listen and, follow up on the stories that give them the stories that they want to hear about, but also the stories they need to hear about. There's a balance there.
Yeah, certainly going to public meetings and handing out your card, getting coffee with people. And you have to understand there's going to be an initial upfront investment in a lot of face time with people. And then just always ask them at the end of a conversation, who else should I talk to? And that's a great way to just start a chain reaction of reporting. See, recently I was trying to cultivate a source at a city that I'm covering, and I'd noticed that one of the counselors hadn't shown up for the last two meetings. And at the end of a meeting, I walked out into the parking lot with this person, and we got into a banter. And at the very end, this person said, well, Jennifer resigned, right? And I said, no. The counselor. And so apparently this person sent an internal email to her fellow counselors tendering her resignation. And so we got that through a records request. And then we wrote the story, and we were the only newspaper that covered it. The newspaper that should have been covering it was suddenly flagged to that situation and started showing up at meetings. And this person who resigned kind of delineated some of the issues that she had been having with City Hall and the management there. So it really is just, showing up, cultivating sources, putting in the time, showing them you're not a threat and that you mean well.
I also think there's a lot to be said for public records requests. When I was in college, a lot of the professors said follow the money, and I think that is so true, especially with what I do in city government. There's so many stories in their budgets and the decisions they made and all those little documents that they'll give you because they're forced to, but they don't want you to see. So I think filing, it's not as many as you can, but I think filing records requests will do you good.
Thank you. I'll turn it back over if any of you have any questions. Yeah?
How do you stay organized?
Good question.
With quite a bit of challenge. I feel like I have 3 different organizing systems, and they all eventually fall apart, and then I take a day and put them back together again. I have an online to-do list that I can keep track of easier than a piece of paper. I try to organize folders for every news story and it's pretty chaotic. I think a lot of journalists, with maybe a few exceptions, the way that we tend to organize things is a little chaotic. But if you can have, you know, a place for each story, you know, like the way I do is like folder for year, month, name of story, maybe the week, depending how many stories you do a week. And then everything for that goes in there. And then, yeah, just find what works for you. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty unorganized.
Yeah.
But I found something that works for me. It's just not like, I mean, it's ideal for me. Like, I don't necessarily have folders for every story. It's like all in my brain. So I like, most of the time I'm writing on really quick deadlines, and I haven't really had the opportunity to do long form stories where like folders would maybe be warranted. And oftentimes I'm just like have a split screen of like a city council meeting and a Word document, and that's my organization. But I do rely on my planner quite a bit. I, you know, have a list of all the stories I'm working on that week. I go through a lot of sticky notes, like a terrible amount of sticky notes because I'm always changing it out. But yeah, keeping a to-do list is really important for me. But yeah, you just have to find out what works for you, and what works for you is not going to work for another person. Yeah, I don't know if I have any good advice on organization.
I don't stay organized, really, beyond just having a list of the stories I want to write in front of me and then occasionally saying, well, this one's too late or this one's not important enough. And then just every week trying to winnow those down to the ones you want to focus on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, having sprawling Word documents and then just piles of papers on my desk where things are kind of loosely, chunked out.
Sorry. I will say, if there's a lot of documents that I have to be looking at, I will print them out, which feels not great with all the paper. But sometimes it's nice to be working on a laptop, but also having a physical copy of what you're looking at, because it's really easy to get like, I don't have to tell you guys this, but like it's easy to get lost in all those tabs and feel overwhelmed. So sometimes just having that printed copy is super helpful for me.
I agree.
Do you have any more questions? Yeah?
You guys kind of touched on like awkward conversations and people not being very trustful of you. But what are some strategies that you have for hesitant or closed off interviewees? Especially like maybe they're like interested in the story, or that group is interested in the story, and maybe they don't trust you or the media, but you really need to hear from them for the story. How do you kind of navigate them being hesitant or closed off during an interview?
Another good question.
I'll take a crack at it. I think, you know, what Eric was saying earlier about putting that time investment in to getting to know people and to sitting down and having those conversations. Maybe they're not interviews. Maybe you're just meeting up for coffee and letting them know what you're all about and asking if they have questions, and you know, coming back repeatedly instead of just dropping into a community for a story and leaving does a lot. I think sometimes you also need to be prepared that if everyone in that community or that individual that you need is not ready to do the story, sometimes you have to wait on that until they are and keep building trust, because you know, if you try to do a story on people and you don't have buy-in, you know, I mean, it's different if it's like an investigative piece on someone who's doing something wrong. But if you're trying to cover like a marginalized community of some kind, or people who have maybe good reason to be cautious about interacting with the media based on their previous experiences or their families or their communities, it's just taking time and proving that you are trustworthy.
Sorry, just to clarify, is the question they've agreed to be interviewed, but they're just hesitant to offer fulsome
Yeah, I guess it's more like,
answers?
I've definitely had instances like where I've interviewed people, or like they've agreed to the interview, but they're like, they don't want to answer certain questions, or they're very hesitant, or like they're like not being very detailed on they might just be like yes, no. You know what I mean? Like they're just very like hesitant, or they don't want to share too many details details with you. So I guess maybe like if it's an investigative piece or something that's a bit more personal, I guess just like strategies where you're in that moment, like how do you you might have these list of questions prepared, but they're not being very responsive to you.
I try not to over-control the situation. Sometimes I'll just flip my notebook over. I'll keep the recording going. They know we're recording. I'll just say, start at the beginning. And we'll just let them follow the path of their own thoughts. Sometimes you have to write around them. Sometimes you can only use a yes/no answer. But what you should do is continue to report on that subject matter in that space, and then you can show them what you've done. To say, look, I nailed the story. That was, had such gravity. So.
I think when I have instances like that, I'll offer them a different way of speaking to me, being like, hey, if you're more comfortable, I can send you questions over email. I mean, that's not preferable, but sometimes you got to do that. Or, if a phone interview isn't ideal, you can meet them for coffee. I also know it's widely frowned upon to send articles before they're published, but I think it does. I think personally, I'm totally fine with reading quotes back to people just so that they know what's going to be published, and I think that also builds trust. Because I'm not in the business of surprising people. I'm not trying to write gotcha journalism. So I think just being upfront and again meeting them where they're at is important, and there's ways to get around that.
Yeah, and I think if it's one of those situations where they agreed to an interview, you're talking, but you can sense there's some hesitancy there. Maybe sometimes being like, hey, do you want to pause for a second and talk about this more? Different people have different approaches to off the record or on background conversations, but sometimes it can be useful to just be like, hey, we're not for the article right now. Is there something that would be helpful for me to know that maybe, we can approach this to try and find a solution together instead of just trying to continue asking the same question and they're avoiding it.
I feel like I saw a few more hands out there. Are there any more student or audience? Yeah?
I wonder, just with communities being so polarized ideologically, how hard it feels like for you to stay unbiased or check your own biases and how you do that when you're writing stories.
That's a good question. I will say, I heavily cover city council, and they have not had that coverage for years and years and years, and they don't like it. It's not a comfortable feeling for them to have someone watching them and writing and using the words that they say in city council meetings. And I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat it?
Just how hard is it to stay unbiased in your writing, and do you have strategies to do that? I thought about it when you said trust, when you talked about the people not trusting you.
Yeah.
I think that can happen from your sources and from your different sides of your community, and so you've got to find a way to stay unbiased, and I don't know quite how you do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think talking with other people, I think it's really easy to pigeonhole yourself and think that you know best. And I've had flack from council members, and I get it hurts. I'm not that big of a person where I'm oh, it doesn't affect me. You guys can say whatever. But yeah, I think talking to other people and really just even reflecting on how you're feeling and recognizing that it is affecting you and recognizing that you are looking at it with bias is the first step, for sure.
Yeah, I think I don't think anyone's ever going to be unbiased. I don't think that is possible, but I think it's important to know what your biases are and work to be fair to everyone. I think when, I haven't covered city council in a while, and I don't usually cover politics, but when I do, I try to work so that my sources know, maybe not everything I write will be flattering, but it's always going to be fair. And they know that if they have an issue, they can let me know and we'll talk about it. And, if there's something I missed or something that doesn't seem fair, I'm going to be open to those conversations. So just be aware of your biases. Don't try to pretend that you don't have them and try to work against them.
Yeah. I will say I have covered city manager salaries, which is not a popular thing to do. And I categorically think it's unfair that my city manager makes $230K when our median income is 60. And I just think that's unfair. So I think reporting on it, I had to take a step back and think, what would a reader want to see out of this piece? And so we ended up going to other cities across the state of a similar size to give more context. And I think context is really key in those articles where you feel your own bias. But again, it's really just talking to your editor and talking to people with other perspectives and recognizing biases.
I guess I would say as long as you've demonstrated in your reporting that you've made a good faith effort to get as many voices as possible, and that it isn't narrowly targeting a point of view without having considered alternative ways of looking at the facts, then you're probably on safe ground. It's just the key is just more reporting.
I love that.
We have about 10 more minutes, so time for any other audience questions. Yeah?
I guess when it comes to your profession and what you're doing, do you find yourself seeking out like the stories that you want to pursue, or kind of just what you're handed by someone else?
I think for me, it is a responsibility to tell the community what's going on. Like, yes, I would love to, write more stories about the environment and, fun things going on in Port Townsend, but then it's like, City Council is, creating a new parking plan that covers the entire downtown of Port Townsend, and it's never happened before, and they're just raising, revenue to pay for their city manager salary. It's just like, there's certain things that you have the responsibility to tell your readers. So it's that balance of, again, what they need to know versus what you think they need to know. But there is room, at least in my job, there's room sometimes for me to do the stories I want.
I'd say it's about 50-50. Half of it is assigned, and some of it just kind of spills forth from my beat, and then some of it are kind of pet projects I enjoy working on.
Yeah, I think that part of it depends too a little bit on the type of news outlet that you work for and the beat that you have. I think for me, I try to find, in my current role, I try to find as many stories that I can pitch that I'm excited about as possible, and I'm lucky to have a lot of freedom in that. Sometimes we'll cover things like City Council, but that's not been the primary type of coverage that our newsroom tends to do. So it's a little bit different. And so I think in my position, it makes sense to find, maybe slightly longer term stories that I think are really interesting and valuable to my community and pitch those because I know that's where I'm going to do my best work. But there's also so much value to just the daily beat reporting of, City Council and, so many other things that like maybe people don't think it's exciting, but it's really important and they really need to get that information. So it'll depend a little bit where you are, I think, too.
Yeah, I think for your mental health, you kind of have to come to terms with what beat you're on. Before this, I still don't love going to city council meetings, but you feel like you have a purpose when you write those stories. So I think coming to terms with the fact that, yes, I'm not going to write, like, my favorite story every week, but knowing that people read your stories and they tell their friends and they learn from you, just keeping that in check is going to help you when you're in the trenches and not having, the funnest time ever.
Do we have any more? Yeah?
What story have you guys written that's like a big impact on your community?
I'm trying to think. There's a lot. Not to
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's when you've been doing it a few years, it's hard to pick one. I mean, I think like part of the challenge answering this question is a lot of the work that reporters do. It's not one big story that makes a huge impact. Sometimes it's that, but a lot of the time it's a dozen stories over a few weeks or a few months that make a slow, gradual impact that, you know, maybe you see, but like it's not like one big explosive thing. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been doing this close to 9 years. I think I said that earlier. I can say big stories that were impactful to me. You know, a few years ago I covered Pullman Regional's emergency room and issues they have and continue to have with that when it comes to overcrowding and limited resources for people going through mental health crises. I think, you know, that's impactful, but a lot of the time it's hard to pinpoint one thing where it's like, okay, now this changed. And I'm not saying that there aren't stories like that, because there absolutely are. But for me, it's been usually a gradual thing.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking about my job right now. Again, we do a lot of city government coverage, and it all feels important because, again, they haven't had that in years. And people are, like, kind of finally waking up to what's really going on there, and it's not all sunshine and butterflies. But I used to work for, I worked in Snoqualmie, and one of the farms out there, Remlinger Farms, they had recently partnered with the Seattle Theater Group to start hosting concerts out there, like 6,000 people concerts. And there's a 1-lane road to get out to Carnation, or 2-lane road, and they do not have the infrastructure for it. The community was completely upset. They don't have the fire service. They don't have the police coverage. And Remlinger Farms has been known for fudging permits and having unsafe conditions. Their stage didn't have a permit connected to it. They just kind of do whatever they want down in Carnation. And so I ended up profiling or speaking to several community members that were really upset about this. And, you know, to no one's surprise, Remlinger Farms didn't want to talk to me. They gave me their PR response, which is just a classic move. But I think it was it lended itself to a powerful story because the community is so concerned, and Remlinger is just not willing to talk. And it really shows that power dynamic. I mean, they had the concerts and they went fine, but those are the stories where you gain trust. When you talk to people and you share their stories and you show that you're listening and you care about what's going on in their communities. So that's probably one of the ones I could think of from recent memory.
It's hard to say, and yeah, this idea that, you know, you write a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen stories, and you're capturing trends and you're just capturing patterns, that can have kind of a cumulative effect. So, see, I covered the second wave of the coronavirus, so when the Delta variant spread. We paid very close attention to how the county commissioners responded and how they explained to the public what was going on and what the public health's response was. And we got the sense that the commissioners were being privately briefed on things that they weren't sharing with the community. And there was just a sense that they weren't being fully transparent. They weren't talking about all of the outbreaks in nursing homes. You know, you'd have the state report saying one thing, and then none of this was coming up in the meeting. And so we wrote a great big story about the fact that, you know, they're often calling for full transparency, but then they don't offer it in the middle of a public health crisis. It's hard to say if that had any kind of effect, but some of the commissioners did say, yeah, we'll do a better job of explaining this to our constituents.
And I think last thing I'll say, just building off what Eric and Mallory said, a lot of the impact of local journalism is not something you see until it goes away. You know, like Mallory mentioned, the city council members haven't been used to having a reporter there and having someone be critical, or not even critical, just like reporting literally what they say. It's really important to have that presence and to have accountability, because otherwise you don't know what's happening or whether there are changes being made that may or may not be good for the community. So yeah, it's that a lot of the most important work that journalists do is the daily grind with dozens of stories over weeks and months and years.
I will also say that I never expected to have to explain journalism as much as I do now. So many people, especially with the climate right now, are wary of journalists. They just don't understand what we do. I've had several, even council members, come up to me and be like, where are the positive stories? Why aren't you doing exciting coverage? And I'm like, I don't write negative or positive stories. I just write stories. If you think it's negative, that's on you. So I would just prepare yourself to defend what you do and defend the stories you write, because it's really worthwhile what you will be doing, and some people just aren't going to get it, but stick with it.
I think we are out of time for today. This has been a really fantastic session. Thank you all for coming. So a reminder to support local journalism, and for the students in the room, participate in the opportunities that are available to you to do such great work. So thank you again to our panelists for joining us today.